what that was, we all know that he gave this tremendous speech, but why? Why that day? Why was this a momentous occasion? And they actually chose that particular day because it was 8 years after a very brutal death, and they chose to symbolize that death. And it was called the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, and it was during the Civil Rights Movement. And the Civil Rights Movement took place, it really started to gain momentum in the 1960s. It started really in the 1950s with the bus boycott. And then as it progressively got bigger and bigger, it started to gain momentum, and they wanted to bring it to Washington, D.C., really put an exclamation point on it. And it was actually the second March on Washington that had been scheduled, because way back in 1941, they tried to do a different March on Washington to bring attention to job discrimination, but President Roosevelt said it's not really a great idea, so I'm just going to pass some legislation over here, and we'll just avoid this March on Washington. And likewise, President Kennedy at the time in 1963 thought, this isn't really, I don't know if this is going to work out, guys. I don't really feel great about this March on Washington. They were expecting about 100,000 people to show up, and they got 250,000. So they got 250,000 people who actually came. And these people were all coming, they were walking to Washington, D.C. They were riding public buses, they were driving cars, they were taking trains. A lot of people even hitchhiked just to get to Washington, D.C. to stand in front of the Lincoln Memorial to hear several keynote speakers. And it wasn't just Martin Luther King Jr. In fact, he wasn't really even the focus at the time. They had really big celebrities that came and played music and spoke. They had Paul Newman, they had Bob Dylan, Charlton Heston. And then what ended up happening was when Martin Luther King Jr. got up there, he had a speech already prepared, and another musician, I believe Marion Anderson was his name, he said, tell him about the dream. And so he went into his speech about the American dream and joining up black people, white people, or a world where there's just really no color in general. He wasn't planning on doing it exactly, but then that really got the crowd revved up. And as a side note, like I said, President Kennedy wasn't really excited about having all these people, especially after the deaths and riots that they had, wasn't excited about everyone coming to Washington, D.C. So what they ended up doing was mobilizing 20,000 policemen to be on call around the March on Washington, and they emptied jails. They pushed people out of hospital emergency rooms because they were trying to get ready for what they thought was going to be a big riot. Guess how many noted riots did they have? None. Okay? 0. And so this is really a testament to what you can get done with civil disobedience. 7th and 8th graders, what's civil disobedience? Somebody raise your hand. Civil disobedience, Michael?
It's when people fight for something without using violence.
When they what?
When they fight for something without using violence.
Exactly. Fight for something without using violence. And their main objective here was to end segregation in public spaces, especially public schools, to get the same minimum wage for black people, which at the time was $2 an hour, and to end police brutality when someone is trying to protest without using violence, to get policemen to stop using violence against those people. So we have a treat of listening to a commemoration of Dr. King's speech from our noted speaker, Army Hall.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American, in whose symbolic shadow we stand today, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the African American still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the African American is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the African American lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the African American is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize the shameful condition. We cannot be satisfied as long as the African American's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. We cannot be satisfied as long as an African American in Mississippi cannot vote and an African American in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair, I say to you today, my friends. And so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at a table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, the state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of oppression and nullification. One day, right there in Alabama, little African-American boys and girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope, and this is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out the mountain of despair, from the mountain of despair, a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. And this will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must come true. And so let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that. Let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi. from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. And when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day with all of God's children, African American men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old African American spirit. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Less than a year later, in 1964, President Johnson, wasn't President Kennedy because he had deceased by that time, President Johnson passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which then ended segregation. And like I said, without a single riot or illustration of violence on that day in 1963, August 28th. You're dismissed.